It is my great honor to have a very special guest in studio who we called, through my friend John Keith, um, join us. And sir, want to introduce yourself? Give us a little background for Rhode Islanders who maybe for some reason don't know who you are.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. I'm State Rep Bob Lancia. I'm a native of Cranston, and I am a second-term Republican, recently reelected. I am started out as a school teacher, Rhode Island College, on to state service. Don't ask me how that happened. On to seminary at 32, and active duty as a Navy chaplain. I volunteered at 40, and I had a great career. And I finished up at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where I shattered my shoulder, my right shoulder, on the way to Iraq. Came home, did a little substitute teaching, some ministering, and eventually got elected to the Rhode Island State House.
You're unique in your focus, if you will, on constituent service. And I say that with kindness because there's a number of representatives who do a wonderful job with that. But at the level at which you focus on the needs of the community, is astonishing. I follow you closely despite the fact that I live way north in Cumberland. What was your motivation, after a lifetime of public service, of getting right back into the arena and jumping on the House bandwagon, if you will?
Well, it was so funny. I had originally returned in '04 after shattering my shoulder, and again done some ministering and some teaching. But it was an election in '06, and the person was running unopposed. And I was naive enough to say, no one should run unopposed. And I jumped in, and I got killed. And 2 years later, I was asked to run again. My team said, no, we're really not interested. The following 2 years after that, my Mayor Fung, asked me if I would run for councilman in Ward 5 at the time. I ran, but I was having one of my many surgeries. I've had 26 surgeries, both shoulders, both knees, over 12 years. And I was having one of my many surgeries. And my wife actually finished the campaign with some high schoolers, and I lost by 500 votes. And then I ran a third time, again for state senate, and it was in a three-way race this time. I lost again, and I was done. And then someone talked me into running for a fourth time for state representative, and I finally won. And again, I'm recently reelected.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank
Well,
you.
I mean, persistence is the key. Ultimately, in a state where the politics are as literally a blood sport, a piece of advice to anyone running for office, and as I've mentioned so often on this show, I consider running for office the second most patriotic duty a citizen can be, followed right after being a member of the armed forces. You have to build name recognition. You have to build an organization. Money, unfortunately, will always be a key part of running for political office. In the absence of overwhelming amounts of that, it often takes a couple of shots, doesn't it? You really have to kind of connect with it in a different way with the community.
Yeah, I like to say I'm the Abraham Lincoln School of Politics. Lose till you win. that's how it works.
Well, the community is better for you having served and continuing to serve. So the reason you joined us tonight, and Jonathan Keith will join us a little bit later in the show, there is an issue that has arisen with Harrington Hall in your community and the sex offender registry. I'll let you kind of give it a background because this is, like so many issues here facing Rhode Islanders, this is an onion issue. There are many, many layers. And the goal of the coalition is always to have that kind of nuanced conversation on the air so folks can, in an uninterrupted, outrage porn-free way, really analyze and focus on the details because this is a highly detailed issue, isn't it?
It sure is. And, I got involved in it after one of my losses. I was invited to a meeting at the State House by Ms. Susanna Rena, at the time the Cranston Crime Watch, now the Regional Crime Watch, and Carolyn Medeiros, the Executive Director of the Alliance for Safe Communities. So I really had no expectation of what I was walking into, and we walked into upstairs into the governor's office, and it was myself, Carolyn, Susanna on one side of the table, Governor Chafee at one end of the table, and on the other table, Mayor Fung, the police chief at the time, Marco Palumbo, and Nicholas Mattiello. And at the time, I think this is before he was majority leader and eventually speaker, but there was upsetment about Harrington Hall and having a few sex offenders. And at the time, after the meeting, there was a gentleman's agreement that there would never be more than 5 sex offenders at Harrington Hall, and it's on the grounds of the Pastore Complex in Cranston. Over time, and as I heard the speaker say when we did a number of forums at the different elementary schools just a few months ago, literally Harrington Hall has become the resort or the place of last resort to put these sex offenders along with the homeless population. Now that place has been run first by the Urban League, and it didn't work out. They next brought in House of Hope, again, didn't work out. And now we're on our third provider, which is Crossroads. And there are 118 beds there, but you can only fill 112 because of the fire codes. And basically, it's a homeless shelter. And however, because there's no place to put the sex offenders, that is where they are being placed. And at one time during the winter, we had out of 112 beds, 60 sex offenders, many of them level 2, level 3. Now I have 3 elementary schools, less than an hour's walk, a middle and a high school. And I know the speaker had some schools as well. And the problem was, because of the way they were contracted, you had no service from 7 in the morning till 5 at night. So basically, at that time, these people just let loose into the streets of Cranston to do whatever. And you just can't have that. When you look at the number of incidents and their different police sheets, multiple occasions where, it's not one incident, it's multiple incidents. So the need to, or the opportunity to reoffend, or likelihood is there. And so after all this time working with these folks, I actually, working with Carolyn, working with Suzanne, put a bill in to limit the number of sex offenders at any state-funded facility to 10% of the total population. And after a hard-fought battle, it finally did pass the House. It now, a companion bill is now sitting in the Senate, and we are demanding action in the Senate and to get this thing passed. And that's our goal.
So in your mind, in the minds of so many of the folks in the neighborhood, this represented a clear and present danger to particularly youth who were attending any one of a number of area schools.
That's right.
What does your legislation provide? I guess, or the bigger question is, and you're known locally for being a very charitable individual on a very personal level. This is a problem for the ages. I think we all understand that there's a high degree of recidivism amongst that community, particularly when you get to the level 3 category. How do you balance then the clear need to protect young children, the clear need to protect the community, the clear need, quite frankly, to protect those individuals who are homeless and find themselves in a situation literally from themselves, with the need to find a solution for them for somewhere to go? How do you balance that?
Well, that's an excellent question, and for me, this has been going on for a few years, and there had been no solution, and it was just going to continue to keep on going, I believed. And so my legislation, essentially, working with, again, the speaker and the local folks, upon passage of this legislation, we were going to give the executive branch, the governor's office, 6 months to fix this problem. And a lot of people said, well, Representative, that's 6 months. They can't fix this in 6 months. I said, well, the problem is it's been going on for years. So we're going to give them 6 months to finally fix this thing. And my hope right along, has been that we would bring all the players to the table, that everyone would have a part in this. Because I know the province delegation during the debate on the floor is very upset because they thought what we were trying to do is move everybody into province. And that was not the situation at all. What we're trying to do is actually bring everybody to the table, and there's people being paid to provide service, but there are a lot of great volunteer organizations who go to different homeless shelters and things and want to help. And I said, if we could bring everybody together to the table and work on this, you could have a shelter, say, that was dedicated, and because of the present danger, dedicated to sex offenders. And we talked about this, and then it would be supervision, programming, and staffed. Now some people say, well, they're sex offenders, we should do this, that, or the other. Well, you know what? I am an ordained American Baptist minister. I am a former chaplain in the Navy, and I am a person who has compassion. So we have to provide, for them as well. So that's the goal, and I think it's doable. So we got to bring everybody to the table, and that's what I hope my legislation would accomplish.
No, that's excellent. And so there's a recognition that we can't just continue to shove this problem under the carpet. We can't ignore it in the hopes that somehow magically it'll go away. There's a recognition that there has to be a facility. There has to be some way, preferably from the private sector, preferably utilizing whatever volunteer availability, and to address this. Now, does the legislation as it's currently written include any of those provisions, or is that still part of the, as we call it, the sausage making, if you will, that takes place in what we lovingly refer to, all credit to Rudy Cheeks, as halitosis hall?
Yeah, that's a very good question. No, the hope would be to force the folks to finally come to the table to find a solution. And even as after the bill was passed, there was a recognition that more money would have to be put into this endeavor. Other facilities stood up to provide for those needs. And that's something that's needed to be done for years, and hopefully this legislation will be the catalyst for that.
Whose responsibility is it in government at this point? And remember, I'm a libertarian, so I use those words carefully.
It's clearly the administration. I mean, that's who we were working with initially, Governor Chafee, and now it's Governor Raimondo. And I have to be honest too. I mean, during some of the testimony in finance on another matter, actually played a part in this legislation passing. You may know, DCYF is a mess, and there was an incident when I was having my series of community forums for my constituents at 3 elementary schools, where 4 children died that were in the care of DCYF. And testimony in finance, just a few days prior to that, it came out in testimony that there were 35 administrators making 6-figure incomes at DCYF, but they needed 119 employees. So when those 4 children died, the governor immediately hired not 119, which is what we needed, emergently hired 70. And at the time this was going through, they had hired 12. I think, they were on their way, and they had another 58. They were in the process. They were hiring. But, I mean, that's where we were. So that actually played a part, I think, in this legislation passing, because I made a point of making that connection. And I had said at the time at one of the elementary schools, I will not allow one child in this district, my district, to be either raped, molested, or killed, because it'll only take one. So, yeah.
What you bring up a key point, and this government's near death-like obsession with generating highly compensated middle-level management jobs, particularly in this administration, which is clearly, and this is my opinion, as I said, I don't like to foist my opinions on our guests, but it would appear that the only real job growth that's taking place in this state is middle-level management jobs, highly compensated, more highly compensated than similar positions in the dreaded private sector, and yet simultaneously ignoring those kind of on-the-ground needs. I mean, you talk about caseworkers for social services, you talk about a health department that's grotesquely underfunded in terms of not, again, the middle-level management, or not the prior administrator's near obsession with all things international. I'm talking about the people who go from restaurant to restaurant or bakery to bakery to see if, in fact, things are what they are supposed to be. How did this happen? How did we get to this point?
Honestly, it's really. I think I say this all the time, but any party in power, I don't care. Democrat, Republicans, Libertarian, all due respect. For 70 plus years, power. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And what happens is, you've got people you got to take care of, people you've got to help, people you got to find places for, and really, it really becomes a payback. And essentially, I mean, that's what happens. And honestly, I think my minority leader, Patricia Morgan, she was asking the governor's office, saying to the governor's office, could I get a list of the number of people you've hired, and could I get, the salaries, this kind of thing. That's what she was looking for, and I guess someone else, and I think, I forget the young man's name, but does a lot of hard work, Justin Katz. Right. He came up with a figure of over 400 positions, and again, 6-figure at least income. Now, interestingly, the night of the mayor of the governor's inauguration, she said something very interesting. She said, "I'm supposed to get an 8% raise. I'm going to take 3, and I'm going to leave 5 on the table." And after all that's happened, I think back now and say, I wish she had taken the 8 and left things alone, because Governor Chafee had a semi-freeze on. Had that still been in place, we would be in a far better position financially. I believe that. The second thing is, since then, we have heard some recent incidents, where we've got even the building I work in, the number of employees. Just look at the Attorney General's office versus the General Assembly. I think the General Assembly may have as many or more positions than the Attorney General's office. And think about the things that the Attorney General's office does. I mean, 24/7 investigations, the type of things they do.
Right.
Can you imagine? And I'm not even sure what their budget is, but imagine that, equal in size to the Attorney General's office.
And let's never forget that Governor Raimondo, one of the first words out of her mouth election night, that sad evening, was that you could neither tax, spend, or cut taxes your way out of a recession or out of a difficult situation. And I'm not quoting her, but that was the general concept. You can't cut your way out of it. Well, the bloat that we see, both here where we sit in the city of Providence, and the bloat that we see occurring at the state level, while at the same time fundamental needs are not being met, is astonishing.
It's also, the word I would use is unconscionable. And even Greg Amore, Representative Amore, who I have deepest respect for, East Providence teachers, representative, he did an op-ed in the Providence Journal newspaper, and he made the point that the governor was hiring out-of-state people at bloated salaries. Even he said, where is the public service aspect? Not taking the big money, but taking less money to do the job. So even he recognized it early on.
Well, there was a point when you look at public service salaries where one of the reasons why you had what have become excessive compensation packages in terms of benefits, retirement, was the notion that public service employees were not highly compensated. And that was the unspoken quid pro quo. We've come full circle. There's been no cuts despite a dramatic need at every level to employee benefits. Nothing near the type of cuts that people, again, in the dreaded private sector have had to suffer through. Yet at the same time, salaries are out of control, and it would appear that many of the government's middle to senior level hires are sort of the failed cast-offs, again, my words, failed cast-offs of just about every New England state government, not the least of which is Stephen Pryor, whose abject failure as the Department of Education chief in the state of Connecticut is well documented. He came here, I'm not quite sure where the experience set is, to essentially become investment banker to out-of-state companies looking for an easy grift. Again, my words. Let's get back to the legislation then. Is there going to be, first off, an attempt to then, during this session or the next session, tailor legislation or tailor an approach to provide the type of intervening services necessary to address the homeless issue amongst recidivist sex offenders?
Well, my hope would be that that we bring all the players to the table, that what wouldn't be necessary, that we would be able to hash it out, hammer it out, or, around the table with all the players.
Wait a minute, you mean do it without passing a law?
Exactly.
You've just been given an honorary membership of the Libertarian Party. Let's not get crazy here. Legislation is not just law; it's our life.
Interesting you say that, actually. Some of the bills that we pass, it comes to the point in my mind, and I've only been there 2+ years, but we literally, it appears we're micromanaging. We're trying to micromanage in many cases every aspect of an individual's life. And I'm old enough when Fahrenheit 451 was required reading, and you think about these people, drug-induced, giving them these la-la land pills, sitting in front of a TV all day. I mean, where are we going? It's just because, the opportunities for many people are not there. And we keep talking about that the numbers of people employed, they're going down because people are dropping out of the workforce. And, coincidentally, as you know, Rhode Island, I think, may be the #1 opioid addicted state in the country, which again is so sad. And for me, I think a lot of times, yes, sometimes it's because of health issues, but sometimes it's an escape.
If you look at the endless list of government contributions to the mess we're in right now. We're a state highly reliant on casino gambling, which if you listen to my prior segment, you'll understand now. After we had a little economics intervention about an hour ago here online. By the way, I've offered to do that at the General Assembly. If I've got a libertarian attack squad, SWAT team, if you will, ready to jump into the State House, lock the doors, pass out the Samuelson 101 book, and actually engage in a cogent conversation of things like the minimum wage, like the multiplier effect, like price elasticity, all the fundamentals to just kind of bring up the legislature to speed. But again, this unholy reliance on casino gambling, which, when it looked like there might be a strike at Twin River this week, all of a sudden the state is shaken to its core because the teat of tax revenue gambling induced might be challenged. Yet we live in a state run by a governor who claims, and by the way, I have a lot of progressive friends. She claims to be a progressive. She's nothing of the sort, but claims to be worried about individual rights, individual futures, yet a significant part of our revenues is generated by deluding people who have poor math skills into thinking that they're going to somehow win their way out of the kind of abject poverty this failed attempt at socialism in this state has created. You look on how we addressed the opioid situation. You look upon how we address the economy. You look at the bloated state spending on salaries at the high level. This is the recipe for failure that this governor has not only ignored, but in one real sense, very doubled down on.
Well, I thought, when the session started, of course, she had the proposal for the $30 million for free college. And honestly, when CCRI came out with their statement report, and depending who you're listening to, graduation at CCRI anywhere from 3 to 14%. 2/3 of the students attending there need remedial help. I agree with the speaker when we were at the Greater Chamber of Commerce luncheon at the Convention Center. He thought our focus should be on K through 12, and I do as well. And I actually had introduced some legislation that would help the Catholic schools, some Jewish schools, Christian schools, not charter schools, but just alternative schools. When I was listening to their presentation, they have a graduation rate in the high school level of 93%. They have a college graduation rate of 93%, and they according to their statistics, they saved the state $293 million because of their own buildings, facilities, and what they do. But the success rate, and to understand that investment in public education, and also we have, according to Aaron Regenberg, a progressive East Side. When he had that group at the beginning of the year, in fact, I think Greg Amore was there that day. $1.9 billion in delayed construction costs for public school rehab. $1.9 billion. It's staggering.
Yeah, the public schools here in Providence in particular are just literally crumbling around us.
Awful. And at East Providence, just the other day, they were talking about East Providence High. I know Gladstone Elementary in my own city. I mean, these are schools that are crying for help. So, when we look at a $30 million investment, in free college versus, the needs in the public schools, just in building repair and maintenance, and I just it's hard for me to support that right now.
Well, the term I often use, and I know people have registered offense at this. Years ago, I had a conversation with a former head of the Providence Teachers Union, and I referred to it as nothing less than an educational holocaust, and that we've lost an entire generation who, by outsiders' estimates, not mine, by outsiders' estimates, professionals and organizations like the National Association of Manufacturing have pointed to the Providence school product. And I want to be careful here. This is not because there aren't a lot of hardworking teachers, there aren't a lot of parents who care, there aren't a lot of students who try their best, and there are wonderful students at places like CCRI, but the system has simply ceased to function. And we've lost an entire generation who, by outsiders' descriptions, are borderline employable. So even if all these magical jobs appeared as a result of Governor Raimondo's, again, bloated attempts at corporate welfare, which, by the way, have yet to yield anything other than great press releases and great national media, clearly a lot of those students, I'm painting with a broad brush, but a lot of those students aren't prepared for them anyway.
Well, I mean, I was kind of staggered by the statistics at CCRI, my own grandkids, some have gone through the public schools, a couple went to parochial school. One of my granddaughters, she left high school a year early to go to the first nursing program for high schoolers downtown here. So my thing is that it takes, I think, a variety of opportunities. We have to allow for a variety of opportunities for young people to be successful, because people blossom in different settings, and we have to provide for that,
Right.
and that's the way I approach it.
And the failure of the state to, and again, the people at Davies, there are people out there doing a yeoman's work in this, but on a large scale, the failure of the state to provide vocational educational opportunities to the point where for-profit institutions have popped up because of the absence of I'll call it a determined, well-thought-out, articulated approach to vocational engineering, technical schools, is tragic.
Well, in my own city, we've got a career and technical school at Cranston West, and they do great work. They are offering that alternative, because again, you can't fit everybody into that one
Right.
keyhole, and so I just believe in providing and my granddaughter is who went into the nursing program. That's a great example. You stay an extra year, and then you go on to Rhode Island College, and now she wanted to be a nurse practitioner, and now she's even looking at maybe opening an assisted living facility. So I mean, she's just thinking out of the box and working hard, but that opportunity is provided. We need to have more opportunities like that.
No, absolutely, because we've got this governor who's got an obsession with college and universities in an era when folks are very often taking a hard look at the efficacy and the expense of a college education. We know enough now, 2 or 3 generations post-boomer, that one size does not fit all, that for a number of reasons left to a different show, the cost of this university education has exploded. And so what's bizarre is the governor's attempt to turn in university educations into almost a technical environment, yet at the same time simultaneously ignoring the crying need to expand Cranston West or Davies programs in a focused, appropriate setting. It's crazy.
and again, I think the favorite word for me is the word collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
If I heard that once, I've heard that 100 times. The problem is, many times, the only people are willing to collaborate with are those people who are in agreement
Right.
with their viewpoint or their thought process.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that that's a recipe for success. And that's why even when we go back to, talking about the sex offender issue or getting together, you need to bring people with diverse backgrounds, diverse viewpoints together around a table and hammer it out. And, I'm a real advocate of that.
Now, you have a reputation for your willingness to work across the aisle in a really a fair, low-key manner.
Well, I thank you for saying that. My wife and I, we do 3-4 events a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We are in Cranston servicing our constituents, but we're also in Central Falls, we're also in Providence, we're also in Pawtucket. We get around. We're well known in the Latino community, the African American community, the Laotian community, Cambodian, the Indian community, and we're not photo op people. My wife and I, we were a clergy couple, and now we consider ourselves to be a legislative couple. If they see me, they're going to see my wife, and and if I'm there, they expect to see her, and they'll say, "Where's your wife? You there?" To look around the corner. But essentially, we don't do photo ops. If we're not going to go and spend the time, because you've got to understand people's circumstances, and that is one of the problems with my own party, the Republican Party. We don't get that yet, and I think maybe even nationally it's a bit of an issue too. A bit of an issue. That's an understatement.
Right.
We've got to understand the dynamics. They're changing. And we've got to reach out to the wider community, and so my wife and I are trying to model that, and I think we're modeling it successfully. But we care, we do love these people, and we get involved, and we don't do photo ops. If we're not going to go stay and participate, we don't bother, and we get invited to everything, and we go. The speaker himself said, "Representative, you'd go to the opening of an envelope," and I said, "Speaker, for the red envelope, yes."
Absolutely. Which brings me to the next obvious question with regard to this legislation. And you mentioned that you had sat down with Governor Chafee. And I'll just say an aside, I had the opportunity for the first time in my life to actually meet Governor Chafee last Sunday morning at 8 o'clock at a beach in southern Rhode Island for the kickoff, if you will, for the 68-plus mile march, hike, if you will, up the North-South Trail by the folks opposing the Invenergy facility.
Wow.
And I had a wonderful conversation with him. I'll just throw this out there. It would appear, given the abruptness, the brusque attitude of the current administration, there are people who are looking at Lincoln Chafee in a very different light these days. Just let that hang out there. So Governor Chafee, former Governor Chafee, had gotten himself involved in this issue. What level of cooperation are you getting from the current governor in terms of addressing this situation?
I have not actually ever had a chance to sit down with her to talk about the legislation. My hope would be that she would see the need for that legislation, and if it passes, she doesn't have to sign it. She can let it become law. She could veto it, or she could sign it. But again, we've got to get it through the Senate side, and then hopefully, she'll see the value in this and move, and help us move forward, and then bring these people there, because ultimately it's gonna fall to her administration to, in fact, try to help us, make this a successful transition.
Now, which brings us to the issue du jour, if you will. It's on the Senate side. It's still on the Senate side. Now, when did this actually get passed by the House of Representatives?
I think it has to be at least a month ago, and there actually at the time was not a Senate companion bill. Did not really, you don't need to have one. I mean, they can pass the House version, but Senator Gallo did eventually put a companion bill in, and right now it's sitting in House Judiciary. And my concern is that the budget, I think, is coming out Tuesday. And of course, once that happens, I mean, everything else gets lost in the process. So this should have been taken care of a long time ago. My goal was to get it passed prior to the budget, because again, it gets lost.
Right. I'm going to have Jonathan Keith join us in a minute, and really we'll get into the more politicized aspects of this. But if you could, and I called it sausage making earlier, explain to folks, if you will, the sausage making that takes place when you've got a bill that's, say, generated by, in this case, your office, under the guise of the House of Representatives, and then is moved on by the Speaker. What has to happen next?
Well, again, you have a choice. Do we put a companion on the Senate side, or do we go to the other chamber and ask them to pass that bill that has been passed in the House? And in this case, it was deemed that they wanted a companion bill in the Senate, and so it was put in there. And my hope, again, was that it would move quickly through and then get passed and hopefully signed.
Is the companion bill different in wording, different in language, different than the House bill?
It is my understanding from talking to Mr. Espello, the Speaker's lawyer, that it is the exact bill. It is the exact same bill as the companion bill.
Right.
So there shouldn't be anything different. It should be the exact same bill. It just needs to be passed, and then hopefully we move on.
So, and the big challenge always is that you have bills, many of which, and folks, if you've ever been involved in the legislative process, you get this. If you haven't, understand that legislation is a culmination often of months, weeks, sometimes years of effort, where language becomes the art. It becomes a function of law. The attempting to mediate the language with the intent of the framers of said legislation is often an act unto itself. This is not easy stuff. This is not not for the timid. So the notion that a tremendous amount of energy would be expended in any form of legislation, and then it would just set, studiously ignored, the elephant in the room, if you will, in an attempt to politicize it at some level, is disturbing. I frankly believe that more time should be spent debating the merits of serious legislation either way, up, down, or as a former Speaker of the House used to say, all around, than some of the blather that's generated in the form of wedding congratulations, recognition of this, recognition of that. How is it that so much time is spent on the useless, and yet issues like this, regardless of how you feel about the legislation, issues like this buried, never to see the light of day?
Well, my wife has a great expression, my wife Marianne, great expression. You hit from where you sit. And, there's 75 members in that chamber. and everyone is sitting in a different place. You know, their mindset, their personal experience, and they bring that all in, and you hear that, you know, during debate. You know, you hear that all the time during debate. So it doesn't surprise me, but, you know, this is very personal for me and for my constituents. And, you know, if you look at even in a wider sense, you know, there are other issues that are important to other people, and what sometimes gets out onto the floor and gets voted on and passed, it has surprised me on occasion.
So if I can sum this all up, and feel free to jump in and correct me, you've got a near crisis situation where you've got a concentrated population of level 2 and level 3 sex offenders in a setting that is entirely too close to school systems, to the general population, a high degree of recidivism within that community, but also a recognition that the issue simply can't be legislated away, that simultaneously there has to be an attempt to find places for these folks to go, to find places where these folks can get the therapy or the help they need. And in absence of that, find a place where, quite frankly, they're going to be secure for their own safety as well as the safety of the community. Counselor, is that a good way to?
That is a perfect way to present that and wrap that up. That is absolutely the case. And you imagine you're in a community, this is during the winter now, and every day you are getting a notification that another sex offender has been placed at Harrington Hall. Absolutely frightening. And my phone, my email would blow up every day. Another one, level 2, level 3, and they include, of course, the picture and the rap sheet, and it's frightening. It's frightening, and every day to be inundated with this, you know, that is really the capper.
No, I understood. And it's easy when you're not in that community to sit back and pass judgment on people who live there. When it's not your child at risk, I applaud your efforts to seek resolution of the underlying problems. I don't know if those efforts have been publicized enough. The recognition that this is, again, a much broader issue than simply where folks who are homeless, who are sex offenders live, but the concept that we have to come with a really comprehensive approach to the entire problem, and we have to do it right away. And if I can juxtapose that issue with the issue that we spent the first hour of the show on, how is it we have time for endless consideration of giveaway deals to politically connected corporate insiders, yet we can't address an issue like this, which is a almost unique compilation of both social justice, individual safety, and the ability to simply care for one's neighbor, whoever that neighbor may be, and whatever situation they may find themselves in. I find that baffling.
And it really, literally, I'm a person, again, an ordained minister, former Navy chaplain, it literally breaks my heart. It literally breaks my heart. These are human beings, and they deserve better. Because when a state fails to care for its most vulnerable, I think that's a primary task of government. And when a government fails to do that, I don't know what they exist for.
I don't think I said it better myself. Representative Bob Lancia, District 16, your Rhode Island House of Representatives. I thank you very much for coming in. Please don't be a stranger. You know, any one of a number of issues. It's you know, as I always say when I have someone special like this on, when I meet someone who, as we say, hashtag takes it very personally, and in his own dignified, quiet way, is quite the conscientious objector at his own level, and in such a dignified manner is so civilly disobedient, we've got an open door for you anytime.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.